All right. So again, we're going to be focusing on the spinal cord. We spent a lot of time on this chapter. It is a intense chapter, and this is the last one. We're going to be focusing on spinal cord. We're going to just focus on the main points. We're going to just move out of this chapter because we've spent a hell of a lot of time in it. Begins with the foramen magnum, and it's going to end in the L1 or L2 vertebrae. As we already know, based on conversations of CNS, mainly focused on the brain, that there has to be a two-way highway, right? Like you have, let's say you have the greatest brain on planet Earth, but you can't get any data downwards to the rest of the body. What use is it? It's pointless. So there has to be two-way communication. So that's one of the functions of this, right? So it's going to be able to communicate from the rest of your body to your brain, right? And back and forth, back and forth. Now, let's just take a look a little bit at gross anatomy, right? Protection. Yes, as I've mentioned before, your cerebral spinal fluid it's not going to be the greatest protection in terms of impact. They mentioned it earlier, like trauma. As far as I know, I don't know anybody who says like, oh, wow, you got in that horrible accident. Oh, geez, that car was really crushed. But you know what? You know why you can walk? Because your cerebral spinal fluid protected you from all the trauma from that wreck. I've never heard anyone say that. So, but I'll tell you what, this does more. This is more on a microbiology level, cerebrospinal fluid. And again, remember we have those epithelial cells with the cilia, and they're going to be moving things in, moving things out. This is what's going to be also helping remove some of the toxicants. Remember, not toxins. I'm going to probably write that down and make it probably worth more points. I hate it when people say, oh, I took this tea, it takes out the toxins. What toxins are you talking about? What the heck is this? Did a black widow bite you and you're drinking some tea? Did a brown recluse bite you with a flesh-eating bacteria? Did a rattlesnake bite you? Because as far as I know, those are the only freaking toxins that I know of. Like, there's many more toxins, but that's what a toxin is. I better not find out that any of you leave my class and go into the medical field and say, oh, it's because the toxins. Toxins are made from living organisms, right? They're made that have to either get inside you or infect you. We make, through cellular respiration, things that are toxic, but they're not toxins, right? So all these morons drinking these teas saying, oh, this is a toxin decleanse. Morons. They don't know what they're talking about. They've never taken an anatomy class. They've never taken a micro class, because if they knew anything, and I mean 101 level, they wouldn't be selling those things like that. It's just ridiculous. So and the reason I'm passionate about it is because you are a reflection. You're going to reflect me someday. And I don't want any of you going over there and talking to any of your patients saying, oh yeah, we're giving you this intravenous thing or something to get the toxins out. Unless they got bit by a rattlesnake or a black widow, then you can say that. Or they ate some poisonous plant and that plant has toxins, right? So please keep that in mind. So the cerebral spinal fluid will remove things that are toxic or toxicants, like free radicals, things that from cellular respiration that we make in our brain. Because you're wondering, what is the brain going to make toxins? No, it's not going to make toxins. What's going to happen is that we know that the brain uses a lot of glucose, and a lot of glucose means a lot of fuel, and it doesn't have the ability to store large amounts of energy like our muscle systems do in the form of glycogen. We don't have glycogen in here. We don't have red muscles in our brain. We don't have that. So as a result, it needs that constant amount of energy to go into our brain to make ATP. And in that process of making ATP, there are some byproducts that get made. And these things, free radicals, toxicants, not toxins, need to be removed, right? And that cilia, finger-like structures through the cerebrospinal fluid help remove that, right? So we're not going to do the whole toxin thing, right? Unless we're really talking about like emergency medicine. That's the only type of situation that you're going to talk about toxins, because that's the only type of situation you're going to encounter some sort of plant or animal that's going to be life-threatening, right? Now, even poison ivy is not a toxin. That's not, it's not, it's not, it's not going to be a toxin. Why? Well, it's probably not going to be life-threatening to you. Yes, it's going to be bad, but it's not life-threatening. That's an oil. It's an oil called urushiol oil. And that oil, it's an immunological response, and it causes that reaction. Some individuals get it, some individuals react, some individuals don't, right? But there are plants that are toxic. There are certain frogs that are toxic, and certain tribes would get certain frogs and get a little arrow and get on the back of the frog, right? It's a neurotoxin. Some of the puffer fish, if you need, it's a delicacy. You need to know how to cut it. You have to go to a special school to make sure you cut it right. It's I forgot the name of that toxin, but it causes paralysis. Have you ever seen the movie, what is it called? Law-Abiding Citizen, Jamie Foxx and the other guy, where does anybody know what I'm talking about? Where he goes to, some guys kill his family, and then they don't really go to jail for a long time, and he waits many, many, many years to seek revenge. And then at one point in the beginning of the movie, this guy's running away from the cops, the criminal, and he purposely makes a gun that has these little spikes. When he pulls the trigger, spikes come out, and it gets his hand, and he stays stuck like that. But he can feel everything, but he can't talk. I believe that was from the pufferfish. And that is a particular causes full paralysis, but he can feel pain, and then he did some very bad things to that individual, right? So that's toxin, Toxin. Toxin. Toxicant is different. Like if you drink lots of alcohol, that's not a toxin. It's alcohol that becomes eventually toxic or intoxicated, right? That's what that is, but it's not a toxin. Toxins are only produced by living organisms. Now, you want to get technical, you just did one that is an actual toxin in our lab exams, which was of the assignments was a toxin. You had lead, right? Which ones others did we do? Alcohol, is that living? The isopropyl alcohol one? Is alcohol alive in the bottle?
No.
No, it's not. Right. So it's not alive, right? Right. What about the tetanus thing?
Yes.
Sir, can you repeat that? You kind of broke up on my end.
All right. So of these 3 lab assignments that you just turned in, which one of them was producing a toxin?
The tetanus.
Yeah. Tetanus. It was a bacteria that got inside you through a deep puncture wound, and then it produced something that resulted in toxins, right? So that lead, no, not isopropyl alcohol, but tetanus, yes. So that was a bacteria. So good job. Good job, Melissa. Okay, we had to go off on that because that is, it gets tiresome hearing people say that over and over and over again. So now we know what the cerebrospinal fluid does and what it does not do. We know that this is also within the meninges, right? But more importantly, we do have some bone that's going to serve more of a protection, okay? Not so much this, not so much this, but bone. For example, your meninges and cerebrospinal fluid, great, that's fine and dandy. But you get your skull cracked, you got a problem. So let's see. So this epidural space, let's talk about it. Cushion of fat or a network of veins and space between vertebrae and the spinal dura mater. All right, so that is an important part. We already talked about this. We're not even going to get into the subarachnoid space. Like, dude, forget that. Yeah, we already went there, done that, lived it, breathed it, replicated it a bazillion times. We already know all about it. We already even went here, talked a little bit about this lumbar puncture tap. So we're not going to really get in that. And you already have an assignment on meningitis. So you're probably digging into it way, way, way in depth. Here, I do want to mention that our spinal nerves are now, this is more part now, this is peripheral nervous systems, right? So peripheral nervous systems and attached by a spinal cord by 31 paired roots. Okay, so this is what when we start seeing that picture of the CNS earlier on in your lab quiz earlier, and you see that CNS and they're kind of different colors that you can't really quite tell that well. Now we're looking at those spinal nerves. And again, please don't, just because I'm trying to move past some stuff for the sake of time, don't think that this is just simpler. Of course, I believe brain is still very more complicated than spine, but that's not to say that the spine is not complicated. So just please keep those things in mind. That's how come we can't make everyone who is paralyzed walk, because there's still things that are very challenging. I just want to break down these areas right here. So instead of looking at these bullet points, cervical spinal nerves, all right? We do notice how it's thin here and it kind of comes a little larger here. That is called the, well, trying to enlarge for you, but take, oh, yeah, I guess that's go. This cervical enlargement. So it's kind of this distinct area here. You can even kind of feel it if you're like massaging someone's in the back of their neck. So in this image, they're facing away, and you're massaging them, and then you get here, you can notice there's a difference, and then it kind of gets thinner again. Well, these here are the dura and arachnoid matter. They have the thoracic spinal nerves, this section here. Lumbar kind of gets a little bit enlarged. If you can kind of see it, kind of just like this over here, cervical enlargement, lumbar enlargement. So lumbar nerves. So just keep these areas, the sarcospinal nerves. So I like this area because it really kind of breaks it down into a nice segments, and I like that. And the reason I skip these is, again, because we're at our beginning phases of learning the spinal cord. So it's always best to look at images like these first before these, because these are not colored, these are not dyed. It becomes more difficult to see this. And this is a better learning tool than this. It's a little more difficult to see that. Here, we'll kind of get into this a little bit more in lab, but I do like this one because we're not getting too intense with it. But again, look where we're starting, okay? I'd really like for you to know that. So spinal cord segments, we have C. So we're starting in C, right? And then look here, spinal nerve in S. So we S1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? And then we break into these other regions. So we go C, spinal cord segment T, and T1. And then we have also, and then we have our, well, spinal cord segment T5, spinal nerve T5s. So this is a pretty good image to kind of give us the basics of what's going on. Now, I'm not going to remove these numbers and point at certain things for you to do that. Like, no, I'm not going to have you counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, now that goes 7, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're not going to spend our time counting. But like I said, I like pointing things out in the regions. Things in the regions is good. Gray matter is located within the core, white matter outside, right? So again, if it's white matter, do you think that the white or the gray is going to have more of a fatty tissue like myelin sheaths? Is it going to be gray or the white? Okay, great, purple, awesome. So let's move forward. We have central canal, runs length of the cord, and of course, we're going to have cerebral spinal fluid. We're going to have some of that in there. So that, again, we already went through cerebral spinal fluid, but again, that's the central canal. So when we kind of look here in terms of the gray matter and spinal roots, it's a section that kind of resembles me. You could look like a butterfly or kind of an H. So that's what we were talking about here. If you look here, gray matter. So this to me looks, yeah, to me looks more like a butterfly versus an H, but yeah, you can totally see that's the gray area. We could totally see that this is going to be more of the white area. So this is a pretty cool cross section coming this way. And then we can see our spinal nerves, the central canal, pia matter, again, arachnoid matter, the spinal dura matter. So just like we saw in CNS, because we are still in CNS. We're just looking in the spinal cord. We still have pia, we still have the arachnoid, we still have the dura. But look what they do. They call it spinal dura. Smart. That's good. That's a good thing. And again, these are roots. Here, these are like ventral roots, right? So just keep those in mind. So this is definitely a picture I'll be putting up. And of course, a blue, remember what your blue indicates, remember what your red indicates in this area, what that means. Well, as we've talked about earlier, many times over and over again, white matter, it can have myelination, the gray really won't, and it can have some areas that will have some non-myelination. So that goes back to the 101, chapter 11, nervous tissue, nervous systems and tissues, and then we drilled it again, we went into the brain, and we're still talking about it. So we already know all this stuff in terms of what in the world is myelination. We've talked about how it's formed, why it's formed, what does it do? We've talked about clinical diseases of myelination. We've talked about multiple sclerosis, and we've gone on and on and on and on and on and on. Like, I mean, big time on this type of stuff. So we're moving on. Of course, as we know, as I started out talking briefly in terms of back surgeries, let's talk a little bit about the spinal cord trauma and some of the issues that we face with it, right? Paresthesias is caused by damage to dorsal roots or sensory tracts, leads to sensory function loss, right? Paralysis. Now, paralysis is not going to affect the dorsal but ventral roots and the ventral horn cells. This one will lead usually to more of a motor function loss. And we usually have two types. So make sure that in terms of this, I will ask you, these types of traumas or disorders, where is it being affected? Dorsal roots, sensory tracts, paralysis, ventral. So just try to keep that in mind. So when you think paralysis, just think ventral. Okay, ventral roots, ventral horn. All right. This one here, we're looking at dorsal, sensory. Those are the main areas that are damaged. Now, what are these two? These are going to be the paralysis. What's the difference between them? So this one here, severe damage to the ventral root or ventral horn, because it still falls under the paralysis. So we're still, it has to be here and has to be here. Okay, so we got that. What's more to it? Can you give us some more information? Well, there has to be, because there's two different types of paralysis. There's probably going to be two different types of effects, or two different types of maybe outcomes here. So what may they be? Impulses do not reach muscles. So as a result, there is no voluntary or involuntary control. So you cannot consciously or subconsciously, which would be the involuntary or the autonomic nervous system, can't kick in. So you have atrophy of the muscles, or muscular atrophy. So they say muscles atrophy here. What about this one? What's happening here in this spastic paralysis? You have damage to the upper neurons of the primary motor cortex. Oh, okay. What will that one do? This is in the upper motor neurons of the primary cortex. Okay, so spinal neurons will remain intact. Muscles are stimulated by reflex activity. However, there is no voluntary control of muscles. Muscles often shorten permanently. So these are the two differences between the paralysis one. This one here is the easy one. You just say leads to sensory function loss. Boom. This one's different. This one has two results. And these are the results that we're talking about here. Here, yes, well, I do want to talk about this. We're going to talk about, if you've ever seen, I think in the movie Forrest Gump, I think he does suffer from the polio virus. So poliomyelitis, destruction of the ventral horn motor neurons by the polio virus, muscles atrophy. All right. So as a result, death may occur from paralysis of the respiratory muscles and cardiac arrest. So you cannot function properly. Here, survivors of polio often develop a post-polio syndrome many years later from neuron loss. Now, again, we don't, right now, most of you may not understand polio. You may not understand it because to you it's not important. And the reason why is because we're not dealing with it. And why are we not often dealing with it? It's through vaccinations. That is the main reason why polio, some of you may not be like, polio. Like, but when my dad was little, like polio was a big deal. Like he grew up, hey dad, do you know anyone who had polio?
Yeah.
Yeah? What happened to them, like when they were kids?
They had a hard time moving around.
Like, did they have to get like sometimes braces or something on their?
They would put braces on their legs.
Yeah. Did they run faster to you, or did you run faster?
No, most of the time they were in crutches.
Most of the time they were in crutches. So for most of us, we don't think about it. You don't worry about it. And your kids are like, oh, you don't worry. Like, I don't want my kid to get polio through vaccination. So for all those people who really get worried about vaccinations, I don't know how they would feel with their little kid with crutches for the rest of his or her life. So that's my 2 cents in terms of vaccinations. But it's real easy for us as a people now in 2021 to nitpick vaccinations, but we didn't live through that. As a parent, I never have to worry about my son getting polio. But let me tell you, there was a generation that had to worry. Is my son going to get that? Is my daughter going to be able to run with the rest of the kids? Right? So I'm assuming, I don't know, in the movie Forrest Gump, when they're like, run, Forrest, run, right? I'm assuming he had polio. That's my best guess. I don't think the movie mentions it, but that's my best guess. So polio was a serious thing, and it affected the peripheral nervous system. And as a result, many children suffered, and they couldn't play with others. And sometimes they wouldn't live to a longer age because they would have respiratory arrest. And that's a very, very sad situation. How do you explain that to a little one? It's very difficult. Like, why me? Why me? We have amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. So what do we have here? Again, look at this: destruction of the ventral horn motor neurons and fibers of the pyramidal tract. What would this do? Loss ability of speech pathology. You can't, it could be slurred words. You could even lose all function of speech in that area is being affected. So as a result, then you can have difficulty swallowing, breathing. And it's not a very good outcome. Usually occurs, death can occur within 5 years or more. Now, there are some environmental factors. We won't get into that. I wish we had some time to discuss environmental toxicology. I'm sure all of you would know that I would love that. That's my thing. That's my happiness in terms of some science. But there's also some genetic mutations involving the ribonucleic acid processing. Now, it does involve glutamate excitotoxicity. We briefly already discussed that. We discussed that what this was, and we talked about where does this come in the formation, and we talked about epilepsy, and we talked about certain drugs, and we talked about certain foods that could help build that. Remember that. We talked about amino acids. So when we think about a person who's taking particular drugs and you don't want a glutamate excitatory, who's going to be that torrent of flood of neurons, you want to think about, are there certain things we can do? Some of you have epilepsy. Well, at least in my evening class, I think there's like 4 people, right? So when we have a problem, we need to think about what can we do to reduce it. For example, bacterial infection. We need to reduce sugar content. Why? Why would we want to reduce our sugars if we have a bacterial infection? Urinary tract infection, infection on our skin, somewhere we have an infection. Why would we want to reduce sugar intake of our diets?
Because sugar is a form of energy.
Well, that's a very good start. It is a form of energy, but you need it too. So without the glucose, we can't function, because that's the first input into glycolysis, which leads into ATP formation. So we need it for energy. What are some of the what are bacteria, that an infection like a bacterial infection? What are bacteria going to do with it? They're going to make energy out of it, but what else do they do?
Do they bind to it?
They kind of on the right track. Yeah, glycocalyxes. Those sugars on the outside, they can really start sticking to that, forming a glycocalyx, right? And they like to bundle. And sometimes they get together like penguins out in the Arctic somewhere, very, very cold, and they huddle together and the winds come and and then they protect all the others on the inside. You should see that in high, fast motion, how well penguins work together. Humans would never be able to do that. We'd eat ourselves. We find ourselves eating, sleeping in the big guy, I'm saying, he's big, let's knock him on the head. Let me sleep in him, like in Star Wars with that, like it's just craziness. We've already seen what we can do as a species just a few days ago. All right. But penguins, wow, talk about amazing teamwork, right? Well, bacteria work just like that. And if you don't know, just Google penguins, Arctic cold, teamwork, and you'll see with a high-speed camera how well they all share the brunt eventually of the code. It's an amazing, amazing thing that Mother Nature does. So in terms of bacteria, they kind of do something like that, but of course without thinking, right? Like it's not like that. So they also form a group, and sometimes that sugar on the outside is very sticky and it prevents bacteria from working. This is what causes problems when people sometimes get infections in a catheter. things like let me get more specific. Bacteria likes to hang around plastic. It is easier to clean a glass cup versus a plastic cup. That's just the facts. If you put something, I don't care, like anything in glass, it's easier to clean, right? But plastics, unless they are like advanced and have like a microban, then they do okay. But plastics are like that. Well, they need sugar, and sugar helps them create that defense. Anyone who's had something that's put in their body, like a prosthesis, something, a knee replacement, and then they have to take it out because it gets infected. It's plastic. Unless you use high grade alloys and metals like titanium, the type of stuff, high grade stuff that we send out into outer space. Like if you have the money and you get some of those, why do you think those screws, when people have a screw and they hurt themselves on their foot or their leg, those screws are super expensive? Because never, practically, like there's like a 99% chance that no bacteria will like get on that screw. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it works. So when we look at this part here, I'm trying to train you to think again. We're seeing this happen. This is the second time we're seeing glutamate excitotoxicity. It's happening again. So we're seeing that this is, yeah, it's important, but we're seeing that it's playing out again in a disorder, just like we saw in individuals that were suffering from some sort of seizures, different forms. We have different forms, right? But some individuals, because this is going to be excitotoxicity. It's going to get them more excited. So this is not good. Now here we're looking at this particular drug. So interferes. We're looking at this drug, and it's going to be interfering with glutamate signaling. It's only treatment. So it's trying to, hey, stop this. So this riluzol's trying to inhibit this excitotoxicity from occurring. Only treatment for LAS. Now, here I like this part here because it's kind of straightforward, and it shows us the pathways without getting crazy, and I like it. So these neural pathways, and we're gonna be focusing, we have PNS, and where's that gonna go in terms of CNS, because it's connected. So the desiccation, most pathways cross from one side of the CNS to another side at some point. You have a relay, consists of a chain or two or three neurons. Somatotopy, precise spinal relationship of the CNS, corresponds to spatial relationship, and symmetry. So pathways of paired symmetry, lefts and right, so symmetries. We're going to get into briefly a first order, second order, and a third order. So we have these things called like first order neurons. And I really like, we can kind of get into it more and more, but I really just want you to say, hey, these are ascending pathways, because you came back here, we saw somewhere down ascending pathways, but we're going to say we have a first order. So these are things that are sensory pathways upward through a chain of 3 neurons. So this is where we're talking ascending, right? Ascending means upward. We're not, because remember the two-way street. So when we're looking at something, think of, wait, where am I in this highway? Am I going this way or am I going this way? So for the first, the second order, I can ask you a simple question and say, where are you in the highway? For a third order, you see what I'm saying? Like, I don't care with all that extra stuff, that I'm not going to do that for the sake of time, but don't lose track of where you are. Like, where is this? Where's the second order? So where you could say, oh, it's ascending. So we're going to be going, I'm on the highway going north versus south. And it's true. You can call it north, you can call it south, whatever you like, or call it to brain, from brain. Very simple, right? So don't lose track of where you are. Something so simple can get you. So make sure we know that we are moving upward upward in direction of brain. So we have our first order, and we have our second order, and we have our third order. And we also have these dorsal column medial, the lemniscal pathways, but we won't get too much into that. But this is what we're trying to take a look at. We're looking at these different areas in the routes in which they were going. So this is what we were saying. This was ascending. So you take a look here. So look at these are the ascending spinal cord tracts. And that's how information is moving upward. So we're moving upwards. We'll get into this a little more detail for lab. No. Now we're looking at descending pathways, right? So we're moving away from brain. So it even says here, impulses from brain to spinal cord, two-way street, ladies and gentlemen. Always remember that. So we have two groups, the direct pathway and the indirect pathways. We have a motor pathway that's going to involve two neurons. That's going to be the upper motor neurons and the lower motor neurons. And again, I'm not going to get too much in detail due to the sake of time. We've got plenty of other stuff to cover. What we're taking a look at here it says diffusion tensor MRI reveals fiber tracts in brain and spinal cord. If you remember the fiber tracts, remember the ones that we had moving in different directions or within, because we're looking at it in this direction, but we also have some that go from left to right hemisphere. So this is kind of the coloration in terms of the fiber tracts. Some of them go very long distances, some of them short distances, some of them from left hemisphere, some of them from right hemisphere, and so forth. So that's what kind of we're taking a look at there. I've mentioned to you this before in terms of development, and that's something that I said I doubt most of you are going to be embryologists, but looking at development within like a fetal development or even before fetus in terms of the embryo, one of the main things to take away, and I told you this, is formation of the central nervous system begins in the neural tube. And that is how come when women are pregnant, you take folic acid. That is the whole reason behind doing that, is because a pregnant woman. That's why it's very important to know, actually, like if you can know as soon as possible whether one's pregnant or not, that's very important, because then you want to take these prenatal vitamins, and most of those prenatal vitamins have a certain higher percentage of folic acid, because I gave you the whole in-depth explanation behind folic acid. I've discussed sphingosine, ceramide synthase enzymes. I went into mycotoxicology and talked about a mycotoxin inhibiting and the formation of these very important sphingolipids. And the sphingolipids, as we know, that fatty, there are lipophilic. They're going to be helping the neural tube. And if you don't have that proper formation, it results in what? Does anybody know what it results in? Spinal what?
Bifida.
That's one, right? Or also known as a neural tube birth defect, right? So spinal bifida, neural tube birth defect, and there's not enclosing of the spinal cord. That's what we're talking about. No one's lived that. No one survives that, because you cannot have the message and conductivity on the two-way highway if the highway is broken apart. It's not formed right. How are you going to get the message from ascending or descending? It's not going to happen. You don't have a two-way highway. So you keep that in mind, all right? That's the whole embryology part, and that is the why. And of course, sometimes some medical doctors just don't take the time to explain that to their patients. They're just, here, make sure you take this. But I'm sure if a doctor said, if you don't take these vitamins, specifically this folic acid, this is what could happen to your baby, and you show them a picture, like on the phone, like this is what's gonna, oh, I'll tell you what, that mom's gonna, pop them pills in real quick. And I'm going to say, don't take more than that, just the right amount. Okay. It's like that little story, Fish Out of Water. I don't know, maybe like a Dr. Seuss book or whatever, but that don't add more fish into the little fish thing, because the fish just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Like, just follow the directions. So that is one of the reasons we take folic acid and neurotube embryology. That's the takeaway. This is a repeat. This is a repeat of the information that was already there at the beginning of chapter 12, which starts out in the development. So we're not gonna do that. Hormones. Hormones play a major role in developmental aspects of the central nervous system, believe it or not. Gender-specific areas appear in both brain and spinal cord. Depends on the presence or absence of fetal testosterone. So early in life, males and females begin to develop differently based on a hormone. And remember what a hormone is. A hormone is a secondary messenger that results in certain things to occur. So very early, that is how come most of the time males and females, our minds are different. We think differently. A male and a female typically means, like, on average, process differently. They're different. The difference starts in the beginning of the embryology, as it says here. I'm not going to share the screen, but I'm going to quote it for you. Gender-specific areas appear in both brain and spinal cord. Depends on presence or absence of a fetal testosterone. Super important. Happens so quick. We see those differences. We see it. And I think that's where that book is so successful. What does it say? Men are from Mars, men are from Venus, or is it the other way around? That book, does anybody know what I'm talking about? Oh, Lord. It's okay. It's okay, going back. Maternal, now let's talk about some other things, right? So we're talking about developmental stuff. So maternal exposure to radiation. All right, okay, yes, that can be harmful, but how much radiation are we talking about here? Or what are we doing here? Like what? Okay, now you know what? I was gonna say the microwave story, but probably some of you don't know what microwaves are. So let's just move on, right? Microwaves are different now than when they first came out. So the whole thing of like, oh, you may not be near a microwave because the radiation might get you. Like, do you think companies in 2021, with everyone getting sued, would make a product that if a woman walks by a microwave while popcorn's popping, that's going to affect her baby? Do you think they would be in business? Probably not. Probably not. Now, some of the first ones, yes. Some of the first ones where there's pretty good levels coming up. Yeah. Yeah. But at today's world that we live in, the year 2021, it's a little different now. You can't compare those microwaves. The first microwave and the microwave we have now, they are different. But I know people till today, like, don't walk by the microwave. And I can think of so many other things that we encounter on our daily life that are more dangerous to us, way more dangerous than that. And one of them being just getting in that car. Because you could be the best driver in the world, and when you pass by that green light and that person doesn't stop on the red, you have no control. So there are things that are beyond our control. Well, thank you, Rebecca. Men are from Mars and women are from Venus. So there is one person out there who understood what I was saying. So yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I will tell you, you know what it feels like? Like it's walking on the stage and then like sharing something with someone and just like the whole stage is silent. Someday you'll know what that feels like. Someday you'll know. You'll have your time. It'll all come around. I just hope I'm in the audience so I can make the chirping cricket sounds for you. Drugs. Well, I think that's kind of a no-brainer, right? Speaking of CNS, yeah, you don't want to do drugs. Like that's just so sad. That's just I'm not even gonna go there because it's just ridiculous. Hey, infections absolutely can be harmful to CNS. And what infection, what bacteria, what is the STD that we covered that every woman when she is pregnant should be tested for? Like automatically 99% of doctors will test this woman for?
HIV.
What?
HIV.
Okay, yeah, that's right. But the one that's gonna affect, the one that we discussed in our labs to affect the brain?
Syphilis?
Syphilis. Yes. Some people don't even know that. Like when they do a test, they 90, at least in the United States, most doctors, unless you really get a messed up one, that you'll always get tested for that. Always gonna get tested for it. But again, probably I'm sure there's some people that haven't, and that's where that's infection. So infection that could be very harmful. We talked about that. Hopefully you've learned that through your syphilis assignment. Alcohol, that's not good. And of course, other infections. Smoking, yeah, it decreases oxygen in blood. Yes, we know that's not a good thing, and which can lead to neuron death and fetal brain damage. So, you know, you have to be careful. Of course, we can't be overly careful, right? I know some people that when they're going to have a baby, they get very nervous about everything. They become overly cautious and they're so stressed out. And that produces stress on the developing baby too. So you have to try to think about being in moderation and don't let the world get you so down that you're so worried about everything. Like, do I eat that egg? Do I eat those beans? Do I eat that rice? Do I eat this apple? Do I eat this orange? Like, what's gonna happen? Like, oh my God, like, whoa. Like your body has a lot of defenses, has a lot of things to protect a child. It's wonderful what the human body can do, but it has limitations, right? You don't want to be consuming alcohol, you don't want to be smoking, and there are certain infections we have to be careful for. Other than that, if you're living an average lifestyle, the average person has the defenses to protect that child, right? And then we talked about things like this one doesn't show it. Look at this one. They do not put it in here. What is the thing that this is lacking where it says developmental aspects of central nervous system and we're talking about embryology and developing? Well, what is it that they're forgetting in here that I introduced to you and you had a lab assignment on it? The syphilis is, go ahead.
The lead?
The lead. That is right. It's not there. So so you're telling me as long as I don't smoke weed, I don't smoke cigarettes, I don't smoke crack, I don't drink alcohol, I'm on meth, I'm gonna be okay. Opioids, that's what it said. That's what I read. That's what I read to you. Or other infections like bacteria and viruses. So they're saying if you don't get an infection, bacterial infection, you don't get a viral infection, and you don't do illegal narcotics and some prescribed medications, you want to stay away, everything's gonna be fine. No, not when it comes to things like out of the tap, when it comes to water. So that you have to be careful. You have to think, What's the age of my home? If you don't know, ask someone, do I have lead pipes? Okay, you might want to get filtered water just to be safe. Where's your water source coming from? Look at your state, data. But again, remember that Flint, Michigan situation, the state data was good. They did their part in terms of the analysis, but they didn't see the point B part or Z from point from the point of it was taken to the point where it comes out of the faucet and you drink the water, right? So that's something you might want to be careful for. And it fails to mention that in this presentation. And this is exactly why, ladies and gentlemen, I try very, very hard to go through these things and provide you these assignments. I'm like, okay, they're missing this piece. I'm trying to educate this group of individuals to help educate other people as much, other people as well. It's kind of like a pay it forward kind of thing. Well, we know there's a lot of issues in terms of what are the effects of some of this stuff. We'll take a look at this clinical, like cerebral palsy, neuromuscular disability involving poorly controlled or paralyzed voluntary muscles. What could be some of the reasons for this? There could be brain damage. Yes, if you don't know what to say for a particular answer involving the CNS or PNS, and you don't have a lot of information and you're just like, could be brain damage. That's like the other card. Do you remember, Marty, what was that card I mentioned in AMP1? I said, when you don't know what to say, you throw that card out. If you go to RN school and they ask you a question, you feel you're put in the spot, you're like, oh, everybody's looking, everybody's waiting. And what's that card?
Homeostasis.
That's right. You say, oh, there's probably some failure of homeostasis. Duh, boom. That's a cash in win card. You're throwing the homeostasis card, right? Okay, so there was brain damage. You're like, oh, some sort of homeostasis is off, right? And the instructor can't fight you on it. I can't argue with it. The only thing I could then say is this. Okay, so there's some homeostasis imbalance. Do you know more or less what kind of? And let's say this is it, possibly from lack of oxygen during birth. And you're like, and then this is what you say. I'm not sure at this time, but I can get back to you with that one. I can look into it. I'll get back with you on that. Saved by the homeostasis card. And the second card for the other back pocket, ladies and gentlemen, is for something that's wrong in movement or anything like that, muscular situation. You can say, oh, there could be something occurring with the CNS, with the PNF system. Oh, what is it? I don't know, but it's very broad, right? So there's your other card. So you have two back pockets, the homeostasis card, and the other one is PNS, CNS situation. So here was this saying lack of oxygen from birth can involve different things like plasticity, speech difficulties, motor impairments. They can all be seen. Patients can have seizures, intellectually impaired, deaf, visually impairment is common as well. So that's one of the things. Keep that in mind. So you know what that is. Let's see. Okay, yeah, this one's kind of sad. Remember what encephaly. So the encephaly, or like this means brain. So in this case here, cerebrum and parts of brain stem never develop because the neural fold fails to fuse. Right? Remember we talked about the brain stem. These folds have to occur. So the child is in a vegetative state and death occurs pretty soon. Here, we already kind of briefly said spinal bifida. So it says incomplete formation of vertebral arches, typically involving the lumbrosarca region. So it says here, spinal bifida, least serious, involves only one or a few missing vertebrae and usually cause no neural problems. But as we know, there are some cases that are way more on the severe situation, in which it says situation if the meninges protrude through the dorsal spine, right? So we have, it says form like a sac-like cyst. So it kind of looks like a cyst over on the spinal cord, right? So if portion of the spinal cord and nerve roots protrude inside sac, it's called the myelomeningeal. Larger cysts can cause neural impairment. So here we go. Of course, I say this whole thing differently. The way I kind of explain it, I go way more. They're telling you what things look like. I trained you on the how at the biochemistry level. And now it says here, most cases caused by lack of folic acid. Again, what I taught you was this part right here, which is non-existent. Where is this? Okay. Lack of folic acid. Oh, it can cause spinal bifida. Okay. I told you the how, the physiology behind it. Right. So that's what I was trying to do, the part that it doesn't do. This, okay, you can read it, you got it, and hopefully we get a picture. No, it doesn't show us a picture. So again, we want, it says the US incidence has dropped with recommendations of supplementation. So they mean vitamins, right? Vitamins. So that's the whole point, was I'm like, all right, I did go through these PowerPoints way earlier on. I'm like, what does it not talk about? All right, boom, talk about these things, train them on this stuff. Now, of course, they didn't say neural tube birth defects. They didn't quite even talk about the neural tube. They talked about spine and all that, okay? But they didn't mention anything on electricity, communication, ascending, descending communications. We talked about assist, neurological impairment, yeah, paralysis, bile and bladder dysfunction. Okay, so there's a lack of communication. Clearly, something's not happening right. But where? Where's the root cause? Where is it really happening? Let's get down and detailed. But you already know that. So yeah, and sometimes that bulb occurs on the top. So let's just all take a look at what that is. I'll put a pause, resume recording. Neural tube birth defects are birth defects of the brain, spine, or spinal cord. They happen in the first month of pregnancy, often before a woman even knows that she is pregnant. That's why I said, got to know as soon as possible. Try to know as soon as possible. If possible, the sooner the better. The two most common neural tube birth defects are spinal bifida and this one. So we already taught spinal bifida and the encephaly, sorry. The spinal bifida and the fetal spinal cord does not close completely. So just think of it like this, right? And this is what they're trying to say in terms of assist. There are some other pictures, not going to go there. Real pictures, not going to do it, but you get the point. You understand kind of what the situation is. So let's just make sure that we teach others and that we continue on through that. That is where it's going to end. We're going to end this presentation. So you're going to leave class early.